So some great advice there from Mahmood. Moving on, we're very happy to have the Royal College of Pathologists join us to present their workshop, Viruses and Vaccines. The RCPath team will help dispel myths and misconceptions, particularly in relation to COVID-19 and the new vaccines that are being developed to protect people from this coronavirus. Here, along with their colleagues running the workshop from the Royal College of Pathologists, is Penny Fletcher, Public Engagement Manager, and Thadcha Retneswaran, Communications Officer.
Great, thank you so much, everyone, and welcome to the Viruses and Vaccine workshop. So I'm Penny, and my colleague Thadcha, you can see as well. So yeah, we're from the Royal College of Pathologists, and we're joined today by two pathologists, Dr. Ralph Schwiebert and Professor Paul Kay. So we're going to let them introduce themselves in a while, and just take you through kind of what we're going to be covering today. So yeah, obviously talking about viruses and vaccines is a very topical area at the moment, and we'll be hearing from our experts, Paul and Ralph, and we really would love you to ask them lots of questions. So we'll give you sort of 10 to 15 minutes where you can put questions in the chat area. So if teachers, if you could take questions from the class and put them into there once we, as they're talking, that would be great. Before we start, we are just going to show a video. So I don't know how many of you have heard of pathology. You probably heard of it, potentially not sure exactly what it is. So we're going to show a video called "What is a Pathologist?" Just 1 minute. So I'm just going to switch out of here and just share the video.
Pathologists are experts in disease. Their job is to work out what is making someone unwell, advise on their treatment, and stop other people getting ill the same way. Pathologists work in laboratories, in clinics, and on hospital wards. Every blood test, allergy diagnosis, or search for infection will involve a pathology team. People who work in pathology services specialise in particular areas. For example, if you're anemic, a haematologist will find out why. When you find a lump, a histopathologist will work out if you have cancer or not. If you have diabetes, a chemical pathologist will plan your treatment. And when you've got an infection, a microbiologist will advise whether or not you need antibiotics, and if so, which one. Bridging science and medicine, pathologists underpin every aspect of patient care, diagnosing, treating, and preventing disease. They are a key part of the healthcare team.
So today we're joined by Dr. Ralph Schwiebert, who is a doctor trained to be a pathologist and specialising in medical microbiology, and also by Professor Paul Kay, who is an immunologist who carries out research on diseases caused by viruses. Ralph and Paul will introduce themselves in a little bit, and you'll be able to discuss some topics with them via the chat area of Blackboard and also ask some questions. So before we hear from our speakers, we'd like to find out how much you already know about viruses and vaccines. So we've got this interactive whiteboard section here. So we'll give you a couple of minutes now to type in the viruses you can think of. Well, that's great. So it's great to see how many different viruses you've already heard of. I wasn't surprised at all that COVID was the first one that popped up, given that we've been hearing a lot about that the last year or so. So the next thing we've got is for you is a quick poll. We've got 6 short polls. So teachers, if you could ask your class for a show of hands and then select the most popular answer. They should pop up on your screen shortly. So, is there a vaccine for smallpox? Yes or no? And most people are saying yes so far. Okay, should we do the next one? Is there a vaccine for HIV? Okay, I've got lots of no's so far. Number 3, how about Ebola? Okay, so this one's a little bit more mixed in terms of responses. 6 yeses and 5 no's so far. Okay, shall we move on to the next one? This is number 4. So, is there a vaccine for measles? Okay, so most of you seem to think yes for this one. I've got 2 more for you. The next one is chickenpox. Many of you may have had this when you were younger. Okay, so this one's split pretty even at the moment. 6 yeses and 6 no's. Give you a few more seconds to respond if you haven't already done so, before we move on to the final one. Okay, and the final one is human papillomavirus. So you may have heard of this as HPV. Is there a vaccine for HPV? Okay, so most people are saying yes. Yes, there is a vaccine for HPV. So we'll reveal the answers now, so you can see how many you got right. There are vaccines for all of these. The only one that there isn't a vaccine for at the moment is HIV. So I'm going to turn to Paul and Ralph now to ask them a couple of questions about this. So Paul and Ralph, it looks like we've already got some effective vaccines for most of these, as you mentioned, apart from HIV. Can you tell us a bit more about some of these vaccines that we've already got?
Sure. So, for example, the smallpox vaccine is a vaccine that we have, but we don't actually need it anymore, and people aren't routinely vaccinated against smallpox anymore. So, for example, my parents' generation was still vaccinated against smallpox, but I haven't been vaccinated against it. And the students listening today won't have been vaccinated against smallpox either. And that's because the vaccine has been so effective that we've essentially eradicated smallpox. And because nobody has had smallpox in many years now, we think, well, there's no point giving the vaccine anymore because the virus essentially doesn't exist anymore. The Ebola vaccine, I saw it was about a 50-50 split, if I remember correctly, in the answers. And that's because the vaccine is a very recent development. It was only at the end of, it was about a year ago that it was licensed. It was in trials for a while. And I think sort of COVID has overshadowed that achievement that, yes, there is now actually an Ebola vaccine that is used for people who live in areas or travel to areas where it is circulating. Of course, the measles vaccine is something that we all get when we're children as part of the MMR vaccine, and it's very potent, very useful, and very effective. Measles is incredibly infectious. You only need to brush past a person who's got measles to catch it if you don't have the vaccine. And then the chickenpox vaccine is something that in the UK we don't routinely use in the NHS. And in many other countries, it is actually used in all kids. For example, in the US and Germany and many other European countries, every child is vaccinated against chickenpox. In the UK, we don't. There's some pros and cons for that. Some people, for example, make the argument that there'll always be some people who can't be vaccinated because maybe they have an allergy to the vaccine. And the risk is if lots of people have the vaccine and some don't, that those people who will get chickenpox, they might catch it at a later stage in when they're a bit older, and when you get chickenpox when you're a bit older, the virus can make you more unwell. But if you get chickenpox as a child, then it's fine and you don't really have any harm from it. So people say, well, you might as well get chickenpox. It doesn't really harm you. And if you get it while you're young, then you'll be fine. And then we don't risk the few people who don't have the vaccine getting it when they're older.
And there is a vaccine against HPV as well that's being given out as well, isn't there?
Yeah,
it's already been rolled out.
Absolutely, and that's very important. So the problem with HPV is that it can predispose you to getting cervical cancer. In fact, we know that almost all cases of cervical cancer are caused by HPV. Not everybody that has HPV will get cervical cancer, but almost everybody that has cervical cancer has it because they caught HPV at some point. So if we vaccinate people against the virus, we essentially can prevent almost all types of cervical cancer, which is quite remarkable.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And of course, HIV is the one that we don't have the vaccine for as yet, because that's one of these very clever viruses which is able to mutate quite easily, change its structure, which makes it difficult for us to design vaccines. It's also a very clever virus in the sense that we really don't know exactly how we make immune responses that protect us against HIV. And if we don't really understand that, it's very hard to design the right type of vaccines.
Thank you both. That's really interesting. We'd actually really love to hear a bit more about what you both do in your jobs now, and find out a bit more about how you got into your particular career paths. If anyone listening has any questions for our speakers, please do add them to the chat. And Paul and Ralph will answer your questions in a short while.
Okay, well maybe I can kick off in that case. So I'm Paul Kay. As you can probably see if you're looking at the photograph in the top left and comparing it to the video screen, you'll see I haven't had my post-lockdown haircut yet, which I'm looking forward to doing this week. But I work at the lovely University of York, beautiful historical city. And we work in these lovely new research labs that have been built for us specifically at the University of York to be able to conduct work to try and understand how our immune system fights different types of infections. So I come under the category of being called an immunologist, and I particularly have interests in understanding how white blood cells are able to respond and fight infections. So I work mainly at the University of York, but as you can see from some of these other photographs, my major interest is actually of diseases that affect children in countries which are far less well off than ourselves. So these are countries very often in Africa and in Asia, particularly India, but also sometimes in South America. And we're really interested in trying to understand some of the particular challenges that we have for developing vaccines and new drugs to fight the types of infections that children in these parts of the world are frequently exposed to. So maybe I could just move to the next slide. So we've heard a lot about COVID over the last year or so, and I'm sure you're all reasonably familiar with the huge impact that COVID has had across the world. About 140 million cases of COVID disease and about 3 million deaths reported worldwide. Let me just go back one. Thank you. So 140 million is a staggeringly high proportion of infected people. But we have to take that in context with the fact that about 1.6 billion people, that's almost a fifth of our population, are infected with groups of infections that we call neglected diseases, largely because these are found in impoverished parts of the world where health resources are very limited. And these types of infections can be caused by viruses, they can be caused by bacteria, or by parasites, or even by fungal infections. And it's really this group of infections that I'm particularly interested in studying and trying to understand how we fight these infections and use that knowledge to develop new vaccines and drugs. And we're particularly excited at the moment that we have a new vaccine for one of these parasitic diseases that we're undergoing clinical trials of in the Sudan, one of the very poor nations in East Africa. So how did I get to start to do all of this and become an immunologist? As you can see, I work in a university setting. I'm not clinically qualified, so I'm a direct product of going from school through undergraduate education, through postgraduate education, through a PhD, and then in remaining within the university sector. And I really started this whole journey back in school days, where I was reading some information about infections, and it really just struck me, how do these microscopic organisms, often just a single cell or not even a whole cell, how do they really manage to cause such devastating diseases within individuals like ourselves that are so complex and have such effective immune systems? How does that interaction really work? And that really led me to going on to an undergraduate degree to study in particular parasites, and then to a postgraduate degree to learn more about how to do research in immunology, which was, and all of that was conducted in London. And then I spent 20 years of my research career working at the School of Tropical Medicine in London, and finally moved to the University of York in 2004. Just a couple of points I wanted to make. I mean, one is really following that keynote session you may have just heard, is how science can be enriched by understanding problems from different perspectives and from bringing in different skills across different disciplines. And certainly when I was young and at school, I believed quite firmly that the only way that you could have an impact in health was probably to become a doctor. And that's really not the case now. And I would really encourage everyone who might have an interest in trying to be engaged in health research, but isn't necessarily interested in becoming formally trained as a doctor, to consider how different disciplines can actually contribute to the development of new medicines. So we work in our research with people who make computer apps, we work with psychologists, we work with economists, we work with mathematicians, really the whole range of different skills that are needed to really develop and use vaccines and drugs most effectively. And of course, there are some spin-offs, for me at least, that my work does actually let me travel to many, many parts of the world. Not all of them pretty, not all of them comfortable, but you do see certainly and experience things that you would never experience in another setting. So I think I'll stop there and move over to Ralph.
Thanks so much, Paul. So Ralph, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining and thanks for listening to me. I'll just spend about 5 minutes to tell you what I do as a microbiologist and tell you what kind of subjects I enjoyed at school and why I chose this career. So my name's Ralph. I'm a doctor and I work in a hospital. And when you work as a doctor, you can specialize in many things. So some people are interested in brain, some people are interested in hearts, some people are interested in mental health, and I'm interested in microbiology. And that is the specialty that deals with infections in humans. So I work at the Leeds General Infirmary, which is a hospital in the middle of Leeds. And it is the big red brick building in the middle of the pictures. And it's been converted into a laboratory many years ago. It's not used as a school anymore. So inside this laboratory, we test over 1 million samples from patients from all around Leeds. And I mean that literally every year we test more than 1 million samples. And we test everything. So blood, spit, urine, poo, fluid around your brain, the fluid around your heart, basically anything that can be taken out of a body, we can test it. So we spend a lot of time deciding how to treat difficult infections. I've got a couple of pictures there of bacteria that are growing on plates. I took those pictures in our lab just last week, and these came from real patients. And you can see some there on the right-hand side, the top right-hand corner. There's some green stuff growing on a circular Petri dish. we call it just a plate. The green stuff is bacteria that are growing, and then you see those white discs that are kind of in a circle around the outside. And those white discs, they contain antibiotics. And what you can see is that the green bacteria, they don't like the stuff, the antibiotics that are impregnated in those discs. So we can basically test in this patient that has this infection with these bacteria, which antibiotics kill the bacteria and which antibiotics don't kill the bacteria. So you can see, for example, the disc on the right-hand side, the green bacteria grow right up to the disc. They're not bothered by that antibiotic at all. So we wouldn't want to use that antibiotic to treat a patient. But the other ones look better. So we also have the ability to test some pretty serious infections in our lab. We've got something called a Category 3 lab, which is sort of this sealed off, specially ventilated room to prevent any infections from escaping the lab. We can test things like tuberculosis and anthrax, all the sort of cool sounding infections. And over the last year, of course, COVID-19 has played a big role in our jobs. So I don't know how much you remember from just the beginning of the year, or last year rather, we didn't have the ability to test for COVID. We didn't know barely anything about COVID. And anybody in Leeds that needed to get tested in our hospital, those swabs had to go to one central lab in London for testing. But of course, they'd only let us send a handful of swabs per day because there were just too many people around the country that needed to be tested. So we were the people that had to make the decision for our patients in Leeds, which patients can get tested and which patients should we not test. And that was quite tricky. But then we had the ability a few months later to do the test ourselves in Leeds. And at the time, we could just maybe do a couple of 100 COVID tests per day. And it was all very labor intensive and manual. But now at the bottom right, you can see one of many of those machines that we have. Now we can do over 3,000 PCR tests just in Leeds per day. And it's all fully automated. And it's just amazing how far it's come in just 1 year. So if we could move on to the next slide. So as a microbiologist, I specialize in diagnosing and treating infections with viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites, and also a big role is the management of the laboratory where all the testing is done. So for example, we have to decide which COVID testing machine do we buy and which COVID testing machine do we not buy. And there's many different ones on offer. And the very big role is picking the right antibiotics to treat infections. Well, we are not just worried about COVID, but many other infections and many infections that are becoming very resistant to treatment. With antibiotics, you may have heard the word superbugs, bacteria that you can't treat with anything anymore because they've become so resistant to antibiotics. So we're very involved in testing bacteria and making sure that we pick the right antibiotic for the right infection in our patients. And I think microbiology is really cool because nobody's immune to infections. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a newborn baby or if you're an elderly person, if you're rich or poor, anybody can get an infection. So you meet people from all walks of life. And I love that link between the patient in the hospital and their blood sample in the lab and being able to see both of them. Being able to see the patient and being able to see the result from the test in the lab, I think that's pretty cool. So why did I choose microbiology? Well, I guess I'll start with in school, the kind of subjects I liked and the A levels I did is I liked the sciencey stuff. I liked chemistry and biology and little cells and DNA and stuff like that. I was less good at the other subjects. So then I went to university to study medicine. And when I finished that, you work for a few years as a junior doctor. And then you can choose what you want to specialize in. And at that point, I decided I want to specialize in infections and microbiology. And that's going to take me another few years. And overall, I think pathology and microbiology is pretty cool. We get to do a lot of interesting things. And one thing that's for sure is that infections and disease in humans in general that's never going to go anywhere. So there's always going to be a job for people that are interested in pathology. Thank you.
Thanks so much to you both. So I've started getting a couple of questions in already. The first one is chickenpox shingles when you're older?
It is. So it's the same virus. It's called varicella zoster is the virus. And the first time when you're exposed to it, it manifests itself as chickenpox. So most people are exposed to chickenpox at a young age. And the first time your body gets the virus, you usually experience it as chickenpox. This is a rash all over your body. But what happens with the virus, even though you feel fine again, the virus can hide away in your body. It becomes dormant, and it doesn't cause you any harm, but it can become dormant in your nerve cells. And what can happen during times of weakness, if you're exhausted, if your body's weak, if your immune system is weakened, a little bit of the virus can flare up again. And then we call it shingles. You don't have the rash all over your body, you just have it over a small section of your body, but it's the same virus.
Cool, thank you very much. And another question that's just popped in is there a microchip in the vaccine? This is a bit of misinformation that's been circulating.
Absolutely not.
No.
Not in any of the vaccines.
No. So it's a bit of a rumour that's been circulating the web. But yeah, it's not true.
No.
A question for both of you. What do you like most about your jobs? What's your favourite thing?
I think for me, it's probably variety of the day-to-day work, and also variety in the people that I meet, whether they are people also in the UK in academic circles, or whether they are people that I meet in different countries around the world, getting exposed to their different problems, their different challenges, trying to understand and how best we can make science work for everybody, really. So variety would be my buzzword, I think.
Amazing. And Ralph, do you have a favorite?
I think I'll probably have to give the same answer. I just love that I get to do so many different things. I don't, do the same thing every day, and every day is a bit different, and every patient is a bit different. And I love that in my job, in the morning I might give teaching to medical students. In the afternoon I might get teaching from people more experienced than me. I might see a patient in the hospital. I might then have to deal with a problem in the laboratory. And it's just lots of different things that you get to do. And I think that's pretty cool. And then if you want to, you can do some more academic stuff, some research. So there's just lots of things to do. And really, the cool thing about healthcare is just whatever you're interested in, there is a niche for you. There's always something that you need it for, no matter what your skills are in healthcare. So you can always find something, if you're passionate about it, to do.
Thank you. So the next question is, how can you safely test if you are allergic to an antibiotic or to vaccine?
Do you want to take that one, Ralph? From a clinical perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, realistically, when children get their vaccines, the vaccines that we use at the moment, well, the reason we do use them is because we know they are so safe. So we don't test adults, the COVID vaccine, or children, or the other vaccines. When somebody comes and has their vaccine given, we don't test them because we know that the vaccines are so safe. And even if people do get side effects, they are usually very minor and not very, they don't cause any threat or harm to the individual. But of course, before we actually start giving vaccines to the whole population, what we do is they're very, 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 very thoroughly tested in trials, in volunteers that are closely monitored to make sure that they're fine. So any vaccine, by the time it is at the stage where it is offered to real, people, it is already at a stage where it is incredibly safe because so much testing has already been done with the vaccine beforehand. And in the development of vaccines, so much work goes into it, first in theoretical models and then in animal studies, and then very cautiously first in humans and then some more humans and then some more humans. And then at some point you just know, listen, we've tested it in so many different settings and it's safe, we're good to go.
So on that topic, there's also another question that's come in. This is something that's been asked quite a lot this year, but about how the COVID vaccine has been developed in under a year. Julie, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, I think there's an important point to make here. The science behind the COVID vaccine has been something which has been building over the last 10 or 20 years. And so by the time we got to the situation where we needed a vaccine for a pandemic like COVID, there was so much of the expertise already in place that it was a relatively easy thing to do to make that vaccine specific for the COVID disease. What's been a remarkable change in terms of delivery of the vaccine is how we've been able to produce, manufacture, do the safety testing, the clinical trials that Ralph mentioned, do all those so quickly. And that has been remarkable, and it's been really a fantastic effort across the communities of basic scientists through to healthcare providers and regulators and governments to allow us to actually get those vaccine studies done. But it's a really important lesson that if we want to develop vaccines this quickly in the future, we have to continue to invest in the basic science, which is what actually underpins the ability to move so rapidly when we need to.
So the speed at which we developed the COVID vaccines were developed is just a demonstration of what can happen when we all collaborate and work together towards one goal.
Absolutely, and the power of having basic science. And the UK is one of the leading countries in the world for basic understanding of how the immune system works and basic understanding of how pathogens work. And we've really developed that over the last 20 years or more. And I think that's just really been exemplified by how quickly we could respond with a new vaccine for COVID.
Brilliant. Why is there a stigma around vaccination? This is one of the questions that has come through.
Well, there is, I think, lots of misinformation. We've had one example already in one of the questions. So there tends to be misinformation. Most of that is really unfounded. There have been some very high-profile situations where people have attributed wrongly that certain types of disease are associated with vaccines and being given vaccines. And it's much harder to dispel something once it's been said than it is to actually stop it being said. Very hard, particularly now in the world of social media where news travels unrestricted in such a rapid way. Anything you'd like to add, Ralph, on that?
Yeah, you've made some very good points, and yeah, I don't know why there is a stigma around vaccines. I think with any of these things, there's always somebody that has something to gain from saying it, and I'm worried that sometimes people take advantage of other people's by peddling misinformation, and they are themselves getting something out of it by selling them some other product that they say is better than the vaccine. Don't get your vaccine, buy this instead. Or yeah, but it's very unfortunate, and I think you're right. It's this sort of unfiltered spread of information is, I suppose, it is one of the consequences of that.
I think there have been some genuine cases where it's not misinformation, but perhaps lack of information. So, for example, some religions would preclude having an injection with an animal product. So it's very important to be able to demonstrate to those communities that the current vaccines for COVID do not contain those particular animal products. And so that's a communication issue rather than a miscommunication issue, if you like. But the microchipping, for example, is a great example of the miscommunication or the false communication. But unfortunately we've lived always with people who like conspiracies. Conspiracy theorists have been around as long as there has been a means of communicating across populations. So I think we will always have to face that problem. It's just a shame when it really impacts on so many people's lives and so many people's health.
Thank you both. We actually have quite a lot of information and some frequently asked questions on our website. We can send those around to you after the session. I'm aware of time, so we'll just take a few more of the questions, I think, before we move on to the final segment. Also, on the topic of COVID, will we need to have booster vaccines every year for COVID? And related to that, will the vaccine work for future variants of coronavirus?
I think the answer for that is still maybe not completely clear. There are clinical trials underway currently to determine how effective boosters would be and how effective these different variants how good the protection will be against different variants. So I think it's possible we would have to have boosters in the same way that we do with flu vaccines. We have a different variant dominates every year, and we have a different flu vaccine every year usually. So that might be the case. Or it might be for most people that we don't need boosting because the level of immunity, even across all the variants, is sufficient to give a reasonable degree of protection. I think we'll probably just have to wait a few more months, maybe till the end of this year, to have the answers for that.
Thank you. And then I think possibly the last question before we move on is why is the AstraZeneca vaccine still being continued if it has negative effects on the human body? So, for example, blood clots. So that's something that's popped up in the news very recently.
I think,
yeah. We'll go for it.
I was just going to say, I think it's a very complicated discussions that are often on the TV reports about cost benefit. But the important thing is that these events that have been witnessed about blood clots are exceedingly rare, so vanishingly rare, that when you consider how much benefit accrues from the vaccine, for the vast majority of people, having the vaccine is still by far the preferred option.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we know about these blood clots is just a testament to how good our information collection system is about picking up even these very rare side effects. And I suppose because we are so good at collecting that information, that might scare some people, but it shouldn't. It just means that we're very cognizant and careful with what we give people, and therefore we collect a lot of information about what side effects might happen and can happen in people. But I think all that goes to show is just how safe the vaccine is, because we do watch it so closely and we do pick up on any small side effects or very rare side effects that can crop up. I think it would be much scarier if we didn't know about the blood clots and they were happening all the same, but nobody was looking for them.
Yeah, so scientists are keeping an eye on all the implications of the vaccines, which is, it's definitely a good thing.
Just to dispel another piece of misinformation I saw on the chat there. No, these vaccines do not affect our DNA.
Thank you for As I mentioned before, we've got a lot of information on our web pages, especially around COVID. So we'll pass those links over to you after the session. I'm now going to hand over to Penny before we wrap up our session.
Thank you, Thadcha. So it was so fascinating with all the questions. You had some great questions, and thanks so much, Paul and Ralph, for answering so many. And I know there were more. So we actually made a decision to skip out one activity, but we will send that to everyone after the event. I think the organisers can help us send that out to schools because it's a discussion event that actually you can do in the classrooms. We actually only have 3 minutes left, so I might show you some of a video, and then again you can watch the rest. We have a competition for everyone. There's actually a chance to win a £25 Amazon voucher by exploring viruses and vaccines through art. If you've never done origami before, we have some really great videos that show you how to do it. Also, at the same time, you'll learn about viruses and vaccines. So it's definitely worth giving it a go. We've actually got 2 vouchers to give away, so there's a good chance. You've got a good chance of winning. So I'm going to share the beginning of a video which shows a science-based artist called Lizzie Burns, who is talking to 2 immunologists. So they work in a similar area to Paul, and showing one of the origami activities, which is to make an origami antibody. And I'm just going to show you the beginning of this. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and then I will explain how you enter.
Hello, my name is Dr. Lizzie Burns, and I've been creating some resources with the Royal College of Pathologists about viruses and vaccines. Now, I wonder if you could grab yourself one of the sheets from the resources about antibodies. So I'm here with 2 immunologists who I'm going to quiz and find out more about antibodies, how they work, what are they. But I want you also to have your sheets and get colouring and cutting with me. So there's 2 sheets. There's one which is showing an antibody, and the other one has got, looks like a virus and lots of little antibodies. So I'm going to find out more about that. So I'm going to direct the camera down, and I'm going to be colouring it. Join me on that. There is no colour at this tiny scale. So we have both Schwabe and Emily, who have kindly joined us and taking a break from their work to answer some questions. So what is an antibody? I hear, Emily, are you more into antibodies?
So I'll just take off my mask.
Yeah.
So antibodies are large Y-shaped proteins produced by our immune system, and their role is to recognize any foreign bodies or foreign invaders and bind to them, so that to help our body to get rid of them. And once our body produces this antibody.
So I'm sorry we didn't get to show you all of that, but we will share that afterwards. So as you can see, there's a conversation between the artist and the scientist, and what we'd like you to do is visit the Viruses and Vaccine page. So I'll just go back to the slides and just so you can see the URL. And we'd like you to make one of 4 different origamis, 1 or 2, and you can choose from a virus. A DNA virus is shown in this picture here, a DNA helix, an antibody, and a syringe. And as I said, Lizzie produced some videos to help with that. And to enter, please share the photos of your origami masterpieces with us by email or on Instagram. If you use Instagram, it's at Royal College of Pathologists, and please use the hashtag viruses and vaccines. You'll receive an email to your school about how to get in touch with us by email if you want to enter that way. We'll let you know if you've won in a few weeks' time. So just over to Thadcha just to share a few other things where you can find out more information.
If you'd like to find out more about pathology and the amazing careers on offer, do check out our website. So that's rcpath.org/careers. There's also a lot of videos that you can check out on YouTube, and we're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So you can keep up to date with all the latest that we're doing and all of our events on there. You'll be sent all of these links by email, as Penny mentioned, after the event. So all that's left for me to do is to thank everyone for participating, and also to thank our fantastic speakers, Professor Paul Kay and Dr. Ralph Schreiber. And I hope you've learned a lot today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.